Some rivalries in football are just competition. Two teams, one trophy. May the best side win. And then there's this list. Pausa. These are the rivalries where losing doesn't just hurt. It ruins careers. It cancels vacations. It makes grown men hang effigies of their own captains from lamp posts outside pubs. It gets police pulled onto the pitch before a World Cup qualifier can even kick off. The 2026 World Cup is now less than a year away. 48 teams, 16 host cities across 3 countries, and a draw that is quietly loading a tournament where every single one of these grudges could land on the same pitch, on the same night, with the whole planet watching. You don't need to be from any of these countries to feel this. Football fans everywhere know exactly what a real rivalry sounds like. That specific silence inside a stadium the second the enemy's national anthem starts playing. That specific noise the second it ends. This channel dug into more than 150 years of match footage, pitch invasions, hand goals, spitting incidents, banned handshakes, and one very famous hanging mannequin to bring you the 10 most vicious international rivalries heading into 2026. Stick around, because the number 1 entry is probably not the one you are thinking of. It is older. It is colder. And most of the world cannot even find the border, is fought over on a map. Pausa. Here is the thing nobody says out loud about football rivalries. They're almost never really about football. Every entry on this list is older than any of the players in it. Older than the coaches. Older, in most cases, than the tournament itself. Football did not create these grudges. Football just gave 2 countries a place to fight them out for 90 minutes, on grass, in front of the entire world, with a scoreboard to settle the argument. That is why they never die. You cannot resolve a war with a penalty shootout, but you can definitely make it feel a little better. So here is how we are going to do this. 10 rivalries. 10 completely different reasons to hate. Some go back to World War II. Some go back to actual colonial rule. One of them goes back to the year 1872, when your grandfather's grandfather was still alive. We are going to work our way up. The pettier feuds first, the ones fueled more by pride and mockery than by blood. And then block by block, we climb into the ones with real historical damage attached. The ones where the players walk out of the tunnel knowing they are not just representing a jersey. They are representing everything their country has been trying to prove for 100 years. Before we start, a warning. If a rivalry you personally cared about does not show up on this list, do not close the video. Drop it in the comments. There is a very good chance we deliberately left it out for the second part, because there are more of these than you think. Now, let us begin with the one everyone expected on this list. The rivalry that produced the most famous single act of cheating in the history of the sport, and for minutes later, the single most beautiful goal ever scored at a World Cup. Same game, same player, same opponent, England, Argentina. To understand why the whole planet stops breathing when these two are drawn against each other, you have to go back further than the goal everybody remembers. Further than the boy in the number 10 shirt with the curls. Further, even, than the war they fought against each other only 4 years before they met on that pitch in Mexico City. You have to go back to 1966, to Wembley Stadium in London, and to a quarterfinal that both nations, 60 years later, still cannot agree on what actually happened. England were hosting the World Cup. They were the tournament favorites on their own soil in front of their own fans. Argentina were the teams standing directly in the way. The two nations had met at a World Cup before, but never with this much on the line. And what unfolded that afternoon at Wembley became, for the Argentine side, the moment football itself became personal. Their captain, Antonio Radin, was sent off in the first half. He refused to leave the pitch. He stood there, arms out, arguing with the referee, refusing to accept the decision for nearly 10 full minutes before police officers had to physically drag him toward the tunnel. And on the way off, as he passed the corner flag, which, that year at Wembley, carried a small British flag on it, Radin deliberately crushed it under his hand. That single gesture from that single furious captain, in that single humiliating exit, is the moment Argentine football decided that England were not opponents. They were enemies, and England agreed. Their manager, Alf Ramsey, walked into the post-match press conference and called the Argentine team, on the record, in front of every microphone in the room, animals. The word crossed the Atlantic before the plane home had even taken off. Argentina has never used another name for that match since. They call it the theft of the century. 20 years went by. 20 years of Argentina waiting for a rematch that mattered. 20 years of England beating them in friendlies, in tournaments, in every context that did not carry the weight of the theft of the century. And then in 1986 at a World Cup in Mexico, the fixture came back around. Except now the wound was not just about a corner flag and a captain being dragged off a pitch. Now there was a war between them. In April of 1982, for years before that quarterfinal in Mexico City, Argentina and the United Kingdom went to war over a group of small, cold, windswept islands in the South Atlantic that Argentina calls Las Malvinas and Britain calls the Falklands. The fighting lasted 74 days. 649 Argentine soldiers were killed. 255 British soldiers were killed. Argentina lost, and the loss did not stay on the battlefield. It came home. It reshaped Argentine politics. It brought down a military government. It left a scar on an entire generation of young men, many of them the same age as the Argentine footballers who would step onto that pitch in Mexico 4 years later. Nobody involved in the game will say the war was on the pitch that day. And every single one of them will tell you it was on the pitch that day. The stadium was the Estadio Azteca. The date was the 22nd of June, 1986. The referee was a Tunisian official named Ali bin Nasser. The temperature that afternoon in Mexico City was over 30 degrees Celsius, an altitude of more than 7,000 feet, and both teams had already been playing for 45 minutes when the moment came. 51st minute, second half. A ball is chipped into the England penalty area. Maradona, 5 feet 5 inches tall, jumps for it against Peter Shilton, the England goalkeeper, who is 6 feet 1 and coming out with both fists. Maradona is not going to win that header. Nobody in the stadium thinks he is going to win that header. But somehow, in the air, the ball goes into the net. The referee, Ali bin Nasser, gives the goal. The linesman, a Bulgarian official named Bogdan Dochev, does not signal. And in the confusion, England's players lose about 90 seconds arguing before the game restarts 1-0 down in a World Cup quarterfinal they were expected to win. Only after the match, in the tunnel, watching the replay, does everyone see it clearly. Maradona did not head the ball. Maradona punched it into the goal with his left fist. In the post-match press conference, asked directly how the goal had been scored, Maradona did not confess. He did not deny it either. He gave the answer that has followed him and that fixture around for 40 years. He said it was scored a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. The hand of God. That sentence, spoken casually in a Mexican press room in the summer of 1986, became one of the most famous quotes in the history of any sport. And it stuck for a reason, because a fair reading of the goal is that Argentina cheated. Argentina cheated openly on the biggest stage in world football against the country they had just lost a war to, and the referee missed it. That on its own would have made this rivalry immortal. And then 4 minutes later, Maradona scored again. Same match. Same half, 55th minute. He picked up the ball inside his own half, roughly 60 yards from goal. 10.6 seconds. 11 touches. He beat 5 England players, Peter Beardsley, Peter Reid, Terry Butcher twice, Terry Fenwick, and then rounded Peter Shilton and slid the ball in. In 2002, FIFA polled the world and voted that run the greatest goal ever scored at a World Cup. The greatest goal in World Cup history, and the most notorious act of cheating in World Cup history. Both scored by the same player, in the same match, in the same 4-minute window, against the same opponent, in a stadium so hot the England players said afterwards they could not feel their legs. That is why this rivalry never goes away. And here is the part that Argentine football has been very open about ever since. Beating England that afternoon was not a means to an end. Beating England was the end. Jorge Valdano, one of Maradona's teammates on that pitch, said out loud in later interviews what everybody suspected. Winning the tournament itself, becoming world champions again, mattered. Of course it mattered. But beating England on that day, in that heat, for years after Las Malvinas, mattered more. Argentina went on to win that World Cup. They beat West Germany 3-2 in the final. They lifted the trophy, and the country celebrated for weeks. But if you ask an Argentine of a certain generation what game he remembers from that summer, he will not tell you about the final. He will tell you about the quarterfinal. He will tell you about the 4 minutes in Mexico City when Diego Maradona, on behalf of every soldier who did not come home from the South Atlantic, punched a ball past Peter Shilton with his fist, waited 4 minutes, and then scored the greatest goal in the history of the sport past the same goalkeeper with his feet. And he will tell you, without smiling, that both goals counted. 12 years after the hand of God, England and Argentina were drawn together again at a World Cup. The year was 1998. The tournament was in France. It was a round of 16 tie in the city of Saint-Étienne on the 30th of June, and by this point the fixture did not need any extra fuel. Everybody watching already knew what it meant. This was the first knockout match between the two since Mexico '86. 12 years of waiting for the rematch, and it was finally here. England were quietly convinced this was going to be their moment. They had a squad built around Alan Shearer, Paul Scholes, David Beckham, and a 19-year-old from Liverpool called Michael Owen, who scored a goal that night in Saint-Étienne that any England fan over 30 can still describe to you shot by shot. Picked the ball up in his own half, ran through the entire Argentine defense at full speed, and finished into the top corner. It remains one of the most iconic solo goals ever scored by an England player at a World Cup. The score was 2-2. Then, in the 47th minute, it all fell apart. Beckham on the floor, fouled by an Argentine midfielder named Diego Simeone. Beckham lifts his leg from the ground and kicks out, barely. Is not violent. Is the kind of petulant flick that a 15-year-old does in a schoolyard fight. Simeone, who is a full-grown professional, goes down theatrically, clutching himself, and would later cheerfully admit in interviews that he had gone down heavier than the contact deserved, and that yes, he had absolutely been trying to get Beckham sent off. The referee, a Danish official named Kim Milton-Nielsen, showed Beckham the red card. England played the rest of the game with 10 men. They took Argentina to penalties, and David Batty missed the decisive kick. Argentina won the shootout. England were out, and the country needed someone to blame. They chose the 23-year-old with the boy band haircut. What happened next is one of the ugliest chapters in English football culture. An effigy of David Beckham, in his England shirt, was hung from a lamppost outside a pub in South London. Newspapers ran headlines calling him things you cannot repeat on a family channel. The Daily Mirror printed the front page, 10 heroic lions, 1 stupid boy, alongside a picture of Beckham with a dartboard drawn over his face. He got death threats in the post. He got death threats when he walked onto pitches away from home. His own manager at club level said afterwards that Beckham could not have been more hated in England at that moment if he had committed actual treason. He was 23 years old. And here is the part that turns this from a moment into an arc. He did not disappear. He did not move abroad. He did not retire from international football. Instead, over the next 4 years, David Beckham did the thing nobody around him thought was possible. He rebuilt. He kept starting for Manchester United. He kept starting for England. He became the England captain. He got married to one of the most famous women on the planet. He turned into the most photographed footballer alive. And when the next World Cup came around in 2002, hosted in Japan and South Korea, England were drawn into a group with Argentina again. Same fixture. For years later. The exact match that had ruined him. Sapporo, Japan. 7th of June, 2002. Group stage. 44th minute of the first half. Michael Owen, the same Michael Owen who had scored that solo goal in France '98, is fouled inside the box by an Argentine defender named Mauricio Pochettino. Penalty to England. And there is only ever going to be one man taking it. Beckham puts the ball on the spot. He hits it straight down the middle. Goalkeeper goes the wrong way. 1-0 to England. Watch the celebration. There is no smile. There is no arms out swagger. Beckham runs toward the England bench with his fists clenched, his face frozen in something that is not joy. It is release. For years of hate, for years of tabloids, for years of being spat at when he walked past strangers on the street, all of it coming out through his eyes in a single penalty kick against the one country he needed to score it against. England held on to that 1-0. And Argentina, that Argentina, with Batistuta and Varone and Ayala and Zanetti, one of the pre-tournament favorites, never recovered. They crashed out in the group stage. They flew home before the round of 16 even started. And David Beckham, the boy who had been hanged in effigy outside a London pub, walked off a World Cup pitch as the man who had knocked them out. That is the England-Argentina file. The hand of God. The goal of the century. The war they do not talk about but never forget. And a boy band haircut kicking out at a midfielder in Saint-Étienne and taking 4 years to make it right. Throw these two teams together in 2026 on North American soil, in front of a global audience, and the football world will stop everything else to watch. We are only on rivalry number 1. Here is a phrase every Mexican football fan has had screamed at them, and every American fan knows by heart. 2-0. 2-0. It isn't just a scoreline. It is a taunt, a weaponized number, a chant that has followed the Mexican national team across 2 decades of qualifiers, friendlies, and Gold Cup finals, and has genuinely gotten inside the head of an entire generation of Mexican players. This is the rivalry the rest of the football world does not fully understand. And it is being played out on home soil this summer, with both countries hosting the same World Cup for the first time in history. To get why Cero cuts the way it does, you have to understand the pecking order the rivalry was born under. For most of football history, this was not close. Mexico was the giant. Mexico was the country with the packed stadiums, the professional league that predated the American League by nearly 70 years, the tradition of qualifying for World Cup after World Cup, while the United States barely showed up. Between 1934 and 1990, the United States men's national team qualified for a total of 1 World Cup. Mexico, in the same window, qualified for 9. This was not a rivalry. This was a big brother patting a little brother on the head every 4 years. And then the little brother grew up. Major League Soccer launched in 1996. American players started going abroad. The United States national team started winning games nobody expected them to win. And then in 2002, at a World Cup hosted by Japan and South Korea, the 2 countries met at a global tournament for the very first time ever. Round of 16, 17th of June, Jeonju, South Korea. Not a friendly, not a Gold Cup. A single elimination knockout at a World Cup with the loser flying home. Mexico were the favorites. Mexico were always the favorites in this fixture. They walked out with their best generation of the era, Rafael Marquez, Cuauhtemoc Blanco, Jared Borgetti, a team that had cruised through their group and expected to beat the Americans the way they had for decades. 8th minute, the United States score. A striker named Brian McBride, header at the back post, 1-0. 65th minute, a 20-year-old winger named Landon Donovan flies onto a cross into the 6-yard box and heads home. 2-0. Mexico spent the last 25 minutes of that match losing their heads. Rafael Marquez got sent off in the 88th minute for a headbutt on the American captain. Fans in the stadium started leaving. And when the final whistle blew, the United States had knocked Mexico out of a World Cup. On the biggest stage the fixture had ever had. 2-0. Cero. The number was born that night, and Mexico has been chasing it ever since. But the taunt did not become a taunt because of that one game. The taunt became a taunt because of what happened next. Because the same fixture in the same qualifying cycle kept ending the exact same way, in the exact same city, at the exact same scoreline. Columbus, Ohio. A modest football-specific stadium, in a modest American city, in the middle of a cold Midwestern winter. Nobody in Mexico ever wanted to play there. And that is exactly why the American Federation kept booking it. 2001. World Cup qualifier. Columbus. Final score 2-0. 2005. World Cup qualifier. Columbus. Final score 2-0. 2009. World Cup qualifier. Columbus. Final score 2-0. 2013. World Cup qualifier. Columbus. Final score 2-0. For consecutive World Cup qualifiers in the same freezing stadium, in the same freezing city, all ending on the same freezing scoreline. This was not a coincidence anymore. This was a curse. And the American fans knew it. Every time Mexico visited Columbus, the same 2 words rained down from the stands from the first minute of the game. Every time a Mexican player touched the ball. Every time a Mexican coach stood up from the bench. 2-0. Cero. Cero. They were calling the final score in advance, and they kept being right. That is what turned a scoreline into a taunt. Not one match. A pattern. Quick pause here. If you have made it this far and you are enjoying this deep dive into the rivalries the World Cup is about to reopen, hit the like button on your way past. It costs you nothing, it takes a second, and it genuinely helps this channel reach more football fans who have been waiting for the 2026 draw the same way you have. Because Cero is only half of this story. The other half happens on Mexican soil. In a stadium 87,000 people can fit inside, 1.5 miles above sea level, where American players have described batteries, coins, bags of beer, and once a mannequin in a United States jersey hanging by the neck from the upper deck. The Estadio Azteca has its own reputation, and every American player who has ever set foot on that pitch will tell you the exact same thing. They never wanted to go back. Every football rivalry has a stadium that becomes a character in the story. For the United States and Mexico, that stadium is not in Ohio. The Estadio Azteca sits inside Mexico City, a mile and a half above sea level, and is the only football ground on the planet that has hosted 2 World Cup finals. Pelé lifted a trophy there in 1970. Maradona lifted a trophy there in 1986. 87,000 people can fit inside its concrete bowl, and for decades the American national team went into that bowl knowing exactly what was going to happen and losing anyway. You have to imagine what a road trip to Mexico City looked like for the United States in the 1990s and 2000s. Wheels down at Benito Juarez International, and the altitude hits you at the airport before you even get to the hotel. 2,200 meters above sea level. Air so thin that professional athletes, arriving from stadiums at sea level, describe the first training session as breathing through a cocktail straw. Add in some of the worst air pollution in the region on top of that, and Americans were losing the game before it started. They did not just lose. They suffered. American players from that era have described in interviews on the record over the years needing intravenous saline drips at halftime just to finish the 90 minutes. American coaches have described sending assistants ahead to Mexico City 2 weeks in advance, trying to acclimate the squad. Bruce Arena, the manager who took the United States to that famous 2002 round of 16 win, has spoken openly about how the Azteca was the one ground where American preparation ran into a wall you cannot train through. And that was just the air. Now add the crowd. American players who visited Azteca in 1990s describe walking out of the tunnel and having batteries, coins, and bags of beer rain down on them. Not thrown, rained. The upper decks would erupt the moment an American player touched the ball. American coaches have talked about warming up substitutes on the sideline with towels held over their heads. One member of the United States delegation, in the run-up to a 1997 qualifier, walked out for the anthems and looked up into the second tier to see a mannequin in a United States national team jersey hanging by the neck from the barrier of the upper deck. That mannequin is one of the most cited images in the entire American versus Mexican rivalry, because that is what makes this fixture different from every other rivalry on this list. Most great football rivalries are between countries roughly on the same level. Argentina and Brazil are both giants. Germany and the Netherlands are both giants. Even England and Scotland are 2 countries with roughly comparable domestic leagues. But this rivalry, for most of its history, was between one football superpower and one country that most of the world was not sure took football seriously. Mexico owned the region. Mexico owned the trophy cabinet. Mexico owned the biggest stadium. And Americans, for decades, could not win inside it. The United States men's national team did not manage a single competitive win at the Estadio Azteca until well into the 21st century. The first American win of any kind at the Azteca did not arrive until August of 2012, a friendly settled by a solitary goal from a defender named Michael Orozco Fiscal. That win, which lasted 5 seconds on paper, 1 goal, 1 clean sheet, 3 points from a friendly, was celebrated by American players like they had won the World Cup because they had just broken a curse that stretched back longer than most of their careers. 2 neighbors, each of them holding the other's nightmare ground. That is what this rivalry is really about. Because now flip the story. When Mexico visits the United States, home advantage almost stops applying. Millions of Mexican and Mexican-American football fans live in cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, and Dallas. Whenever the 2 teams meet in a big American stadium, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, the Coliseum, whichever venue you want to name, the crowd is very often majority Mexico. American players have walked out for so-called home games and heard the Mexican national anthem being sung louder than their own. Their home stadium is not really their home stadium. Their home stadium is a Mexican home game with paperwork, which is why this rivalry is the strangest one on this entire list. It is a fixture where nobody actually gets to be at home. Now put 2026 on top of that. 2026 is the first ever World Cup co-hosted by 3 countries. 16 cities across the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Games at the Rose Bowl. Games at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. Games at Arrowhead in Kansas City. And yes, games at the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, which becomes the first stadium in football history to host matches at 3 different World Cups on top of its 2 previous finals. If these 2 are drawn to meet, and given the seeding, it is more than possible this fixture, for the first time ever, gets played at a World Cup on the home soil of one or both of them with everything on the line. The Dos a Cero taunt has been waiting almost 25 years for a rematch that matters this much. And the mannequin in the Azteca upper deck has been waiting even longer. Some rivalries in football are personal. This one is national. Germany and the Netherlands share a long, quiet border along the Rhine. They share culture. They share trade. They share, in normal circumstances, an easy relationship as neighbors and NATO allies. And they share, underneath all of that, one of the deepest wounds in 20th century European history. Between May of 1940 and May of 1945, the Netherlands was invaded and occupied by Nazi Germany. 200,000 Dutch civilians did not survive the war, and that figure includes tens of thousands who died in the last, brutal winter of the occupation when the Nazi authorities cut off food supplies to Dutch cities. The Netherlands emerged from the war as one of the most damaged countries in Western Europe. And whole generations grew up hearing the stories directly from grandparents who had lived it in a country small enough that everyone knew somebody. That is the ground this rivalry is built on. Every joke, every chant, every kick, everything you are about to hear started there. You want to know how deep it goes? For decades, Dutch fans at Netherlands-Germany matches have chanted, in Dutch, a single phrase that requires historical context to understand. Which willen ons fietsen terug. We want our bicycles back. During the occupation, the Nazi authorities confiscated hundreds of thousands of Dutch bicycles for the war effort. Bicycles are a national symbol in the Netherlands, the way pickup trucks are in Texas. And the Dutch national football team, 70 years later, still shows up to matches against Germany accompanied by fans singing about the bikes that never came home. Now put that in a stadium. Now put a football match on top of it. And now put the biggest trophy in the sport on the line. 1974. World Cup Final. Munich. The Netherlands walked into that final as the most exciting football team the world had ever seen. Their manager, Rinus Michels, had invented a system called total football. Every outfield player capable of playing every outfield position, an orchestra of movement in orange shirts, led by a 27-year-old genius named Johan Cruyff. That side is still, to this day, considered by many analysts to be the greatest team never to win a World Cup. They played the final against West Germany in Munich on Germany's own soil. The Dutch scored in the second minute, before a German player had touched the ball. Johan Neeskens converted a penalty, and for a few glorious moments it looked like the trophy was going home to Amsterdam. West Germany, being West Germany, did not panic. Paul Breitner equalized from the spot. Gerd Müller, the most ruthless goal scorer in European football history, scored the winner just before halftime. 2-1. West Germany lifted the trophy. Johan Cruyff went home empty-handed, and the Netherlands, as a country, never fully got over it. The revenge took 14 years to arrive. 1988. European Championship semi-final. Hamburg. On German soil. The Netherlands beat West Germany 2-1. Ronald Koeman scored a penalty. Marco van Basten scored the winner in the 88th minute. And after the final whistle, in front of the German crowd, Koeman took the shirt of a German player named Olaf Thon and pretended, extremely visibly, to wipe himself with it. He wiped himself with a German shirt in front of the German fans. Reports from that dressing room afterwards described the German players as physically unable to move for close to half an hour after the final whistle. They sat there in silence. Their coach, Franz Beckenbauer, could not get them out of the room. The Netherlands went on to win the tournament, the only major international trophy in Dutch football history. And Dutch fans, all these decades later, will tell you that the trophy was almost secondary. Beating Germany in Germany was the win. Then came Milan. 1990 World Cup. Round of 16. Milan. 21st minute of the first half. Frank Rijkaard, Dutch midfielder, one of the best defensive players in Europe, commits a foul on the German striker Rudi Völler. He is booked. He loses his temper. He spits into the back of Völler's head, into Völler's famously curly mullet, from behind, and the referee does not see it. Play continues. A free kick is taken. Both men tangle up again in the box. This time the referee sees enough of what is happening. He shows red to both of them. Both men have to leave the pitch. And on the walk toward the tunnel, in front of every camera in the stadium, Rijkaard spits at Völler again. The image of that second spit, sitting in the German striker's curls, became one of the most notorious pictures in the history of the sport. Not because of the spit itself. Every football league in the world has ugly moments. It became iconic because it was a Dutchman spitting on a German at a World Cup 5 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and everybody watching understood, at a level below language, that this was not really about a booking. Both men reconciled years later. Rijkaard and Völler eventually laughed about it in a television commercial. And that reconciliation is real and honest. But the wound underneath the rivalry is not so easily buried because it does not belong to the players. It belongs to the countries. And countries have longer memories than any footballer. Total football, total heartbreak, total revenge. This is the bitterest rivalry in European football, and it is not close. Some rivalries are between two football teams. This one is between two football religions. Brazil and Argentina do not just play each other. They argue with each other through every match about which of them actually owns the sport. And that argument goes back to the two names every football fan on the planet still fights about at 3 in the morning in a group chat with their friends. Pelé, Maradona, the most quoted GOAT debate in the history of any sport, and it just happens to have one candidate from each of these two countries. You cannot design a rivalry with more built-in ammunition than that. 5 World Cups on the Brazilian side, 3 on the Argentine side. 58, 62, 70, 94, and 2002 for Brazil. 78, 86, and 2022 for Argentina. 2 of the greatest number 10 shirts ever pulled over a human head. 2 of the greatest generations of attackers ever produced by any football culture. And 2 absolutely opposite ideas of what beautiful football is supposed to look like. Brazil built its identity on flow. Samba, jogo bonito, individual technique in service of collective movement. The idea that a football team is at its best when it is entertaining you. Argentina built its identity on something harder to name in English. The word they use for it is garra. Grit, bite, the refusal to give in. The idea that the highest form of football is not what looks pretty, but what refuses to lose. Beauty on one side of the border, ferocity on the other. Both cultures are absolutely convinced they are correct. Then, in 2021, something happened at the Maracana that Brazil has not forgiven yet. The Copa America Final, 10th of July, 2021. Rio de Janeiro, Argentina versus Brazil. The Maracana is not just a football stadium. The Maracana is the spiritual home of Brazilian football, the ground where Pelé scored his 1,000th career goal, the ground where a generation of Brazilians learned to worship the number 10 shirt. When Brazil hosts a big final at the Maracana, they are not just hosting a match. They are hosting an act of national self-image. Argentina arrived with a 34-year-old Lionel Messi, still without a single senior international trophy after 16 years of trying. 3 Copa America final defeats. 1 World Cup final defeat. A career that had won every club prize imaginable, but had watched an entire country blame him for being the son who never brought home the family gold. 22nd minute. Angel Di Maria receives a long ball over the top. He takes one touch to lift it delicately over the onrushing Ederson. 1-0. Argentina held that scoreline for the remaining 70 minutes. And when the final whistle blew on Brazilian soil, in the Maracana itself, Lionel Messi collapsed onto the grass with his hands over his face and finally, ended 16 years of international disappointment. Wearing sky blue and white. Against Brazil. At the Maracana. Brazilians call it the Argentine Maracanazo. They will not use any other name for it. And then in 2023, Argentina did it again. 21st of November, 2023. The Maracana again. World Cup qualifier. Brazil hosting Argentina for the first time on home soil since that Copa America final. And what should have been a football match became one of the most chaotic international nights in recent memory. Before kickoff, in the stands, Argentine and Brazilian supporters started fighting. Rio de Janeiro military police went in with batons. Argentine fans, including families of the players on the pitch, were being hit. Lionel Messi, watching this happen from the tunnel with his teammates, made a decision. He walked back into the dressing room. The entire Argentina squad followed him. They refused to start the match while their families were being beaten in the stands. A World Cup qualifier at the Maracana was delayed on live global television for close to half an hour because the two sets of fans could not share the same stadium peacefully. When the game finally kicked off, Nicolas Otamendi scored a header in the 63rd minute. 1-0 Argentina. That result was the first World Cup qualifier defeat Brazil had ever suffered on their own soil. In 70-plus years of qualifying tournaments, in every stadium the Brazilian Federation had ever booked. First ever home qualifier defeat, and it was against the one country in the world it was going to hurt the most. Now think about what 2026 looks like with this file open. Argentina are the reigning world champions. Messi is in the twilight of his international career, and according to every quote he has given, the 2026 World Cup will very likely be his last. Brazil, meanwhile, are hunting a sixth World Cup, the one number they have used for decades to close the argument with Argentina forever. Neighbors, giants, two of the best footballing cultures ever produced, separated by one border and roughly zero goodwill. If these two are drawn to meet at the 2026 World Cup, and given the bracket, they can absolutely land in the same knockout round, an entire continent will stop breathing for 90 minutes. Second CTA before we move on. If you have made it this far and you want the next block, the next rivalry, the next hidden story dropped straight into your feed the moment the 2026 draw happens, hit subscribe. This channel is going to cover every single one of these fixtures live as the tournament unfolds, and you're going to want the analysis in your notifications when the brackets get real. Because we are only halfway down this list. And the next one on the list is a rivalry that most global football fans have forgotten exists. But when the ball drops and the two teams line up, the whole night is going to freeze around one memory. One French footballer, one Italian defender, one headbutt in Berlin. Some rivalries live and die on a single moment. This is the one. France and Italy do not carry the historical weight that some of the fixtures further up this list drag around. There is no war between them. There is no colonial history. There is not even a border dispute. They are two founding members of the European Union, two neighbors that share a mountain range, and in most contexts, two nations that get along perfectly well. Except briefly on a summer night in Berlin, when a man named Zinedine Zidane walked past the World Cup trophy on his way to the tunnel, and did not look at it once. To understand why the two are locked in permanently, you have to go back 6 years before Berlin. 2nd of July 2000. European Championship Final. Rotterdam. Italy versus France. Italy scored first through a defender named Marco Del Vecchio. Italy held the lead for 85 minutes of a European final. Italian players were preparing for the trophy ceremony. The Italian coach had already substituted his attackers to try to run down the clock. And then, in the 4th minute of stoppage time, the 94th minute, deep into stoppage, Sylvain Wiltord of France stabbed home an equalizer to send the final to extra time. And in extra time, David Trezeguet of France scored a golden goal that ripped a European trophy out of Italy's hands with the last kick of the tournament. Italy sat on that wound for 6 years. They planned an entire generation's worth of revenge around it. 9th of July 2006. World Cup Final. Olympia Stadium, Berlin. France versus Italy again. And the man in the middle of the pitch for France, wearing the number 10 and the captain's armband, was a 34-year-old midfielder from Marseille who had already announced that this exact match, right now, would be the last professional football game he would ever play. Zinedine Zidane, national treasure of France, arguably the most gifted playmaker of his generation, was retiring on the night of a World Cup final. 7th minute. France win a penalty. Zidane steps up. He does not blast it. He chips it, down the middle. Panenka style. The ball hits the underside of the crossbar and drops in. 1-0 France. A World Cup final opening goal from a retiring legend, taken with the most audacious penalty technique in football, on the biggest stage a player can ever step onto. 19th minute. Corner to Italy. Marco Materazzi, an Italian defender not particularly known for scoring, meets the corner with a bullet header. 1-1. The two would not stop crossing paths for the rest of the night. Regular time ended 1-1. Extra time began. And in the second half of extra time, roughly 10 minutes from a final whistle, in front of a global television audience of hundreds of millions of people, Materazzi said something to Zinedine Zidane as the two walked back up the pitch. We do not know exactly what he said. Materazzi has given multiple, slightly different accounts over the years. Zidane, in the interview he gave afterwards, only confirmed that the insult was about his family, specifically about his mother and his sister, and that after a full 90 minutes of Materazzi tugging his shirt and needling him verbally, this one particular sentence broke him. Zidane turned around. He walked directly up to Materazzi. He lowered his head, and he drove his skull straight into the middle of Materazzi's chest. The Italian defender went down. The Argentine referee, Horacio Elizondo, was informed of the incident by his fourth official watching a monitor on the sideline, one of the earliest cases of a World Cup red card being called from a video replay. Elizondo walked toward Zidane, reached into his pocket, and showed him a red. Zinedine Zidane, the greatest French footballer of his generation, walked off the pitch in Berlin toward the tunnel. On the way, he passed the plinth where the World Cup trophy was already set up in preparation for the ceremony. Every camera in the stadium caught the moment. He walked past the trophy. He did not turn his head. He did not slow down. He walked past the most important object in world football, and he kept walking. That is the last footage of Zinedine Zidane as a professional footballer. Italy went on to win the penalty shootout, 5-3. David Trezeguet, the same David Trezeguet who had ripped Euro 2000 out of Italian hands with a golden goal in Rotterdam, missed the crucial spot kick. Fabio Grosso converted the winner. Italy lifted their 4th World Cup. And Zidane's career ended not with a trophy, not with a lap of honor, but with a red card and a walk of shame past the biggest prize the sport has to offer. That is why this rivalry is still open. Because Italy have the trophy. France have the man. And every time these two meet at a major tournament, somebody in the stadium will hold up a picture of that headbutt within 30 seconds of kickoff. Guaranteed. If the 2026 draw puts these two into the same knockout round, we are all going to feel Berlin again. The fiercest rivalry in Asian football is not really about football at all. It is about history. Japan and South Korea are neighbors, separated by a narrow stretch of sea, and their relationship carries a wound that most European or American football fans do not fully understand. Between 1910 and 1945, 35 years, the Korean peninsula was under Japanese colonial rule. Korean language was suppressed in schools. Korean names were forcibly changed to Japanese ones. Korean labor was conscripted to build Japanese infrastructure and to fight in Japanese wars. And an entire generation of Korean women were coerced into what the Japanese military of that era called comfort stations, a euphemism for organized wartime sexual slavery that the Korean government still, today, negotiates over with the government of Japan. The occupation ended in 1945 when Japan surrendered at the end of the Second World War. But the memory did not end. That memory is what walks into the stadium every time these two national football teams line up against each other. Which is why beating the other is not just 3 points on the group stage table. It is a national statement. It is a chance to plant a flag in front of the entire continent and say, this generation, this jersey, this team is not the one that lost. Now, here is what makes this rivalry the strangest one on this list. They can also cooperate. In 2002, Japan and South Korea did something that no two nations before them had ever done. They co-hosted a FIFA World Cup. Together. On both sides of the sea that separates them. Games alternated between Japanese cities and Korean cities. Fans of every other participating country flew in and out of both countries interchangeably. And it worked. It worked so well that FIFA has used the 2002 model as a reference point for every co-hosted tournament since. More than that, both host nations had the tournaments of their lives. Japan reached the round of 16 for the first time in their history. And South Korea, coached by Gus Hiddink, went on one of the most stunning underdog runs in the history of the sport, beating Portugal, Italy, and Spain on their way to the semifinals. A semifinal. 4th place at a World Cup for South Korea, in front of Korean fans on Korean soil. It remains the greatest tournament ever run by any Asian nation. For a few weeks in the summer of 2002, Japan and South Korea looked, from the outside, like they were fully at peace. And then, whenever they played each other, that peace vanished. The bad blood surfaces in the crowd first. It always does. At major matches between the two, Korean supporters have unfurled enormous banners in the stands aimed squarely at the shared history. Anti-imperial slogans, references to the occupation, references to war crimes tribunals, turning 90 minutes of football live on television into a message about the 20th century. And it does not only go one way. Japanese supporters have, on multiple occasions, brought the Rising Sun flag into stadiums for matches against Korea. That flag, which was the military banner of Imperial Japan during the very colonial era we just described, is treated in South Korea roughly the way the Nazi swastika is treated in Europe. Every time it appears in the stands at a match between these two, a diplomatic incident follows within 24 hours. Some of those incidents have been carried directly by the players themselves. 2011 Asian Cup semi-final in Qatar. A South Korean player named Ki Sung-yuing scored a penalty against Japan and celebrated by mocking, imitating an ape. FIFA opened an investigation. Ki later claimed that his celebration was a direct response to Japanese fans in the stands holding up the Rising Sun banner during the match itself. Neither side ever fully backed down from their version of what had happened. 2012 London Olympics bronze medal match. South Korea beat Japan 2-0 to take the podium. And after the final whistle, a Korean player named Park Jong-woo picked up a hand-drawn placard from a fan and paraded it around the pitch. The placard read, in Korean, "Dokdo is our territory." Dokdo, a tiny cluster of rocky islands in the sea between the two countries, which Japan calls Takashima. Both governments claim them. Neither government has ever agreed to stop claiming them. And a 23-year-old Korean footballer at an Olympic medal ceremony, waving that sign in front of both national delegations, triggered a formal FIFA disciplinary process and an actual diplomatic protest between Tokyo and Seoul. That is what this rivalry looks like now. Not just book players. Not just crunching tackles. Two governments filing paperwork against each other because of what happened on a football pitch. Both nations remain giants of the Asian game. Both nations are, right now, comfortably among the top 2 or 3 sides on the continent, both realistic qualifiers for 2026, and both fielding some of the strongest generations they have produced in a decade. Japan has a squad packed with European-based attackers. South Korea has Son Heung-min in what may be his final World Cup cycle. If these two are drawn into the same group at the 2026 World Cup, the 90 minutes will be some of the tensest 90 minutes of the entire tournament. And every banner in the stands will be about the last 100 years, not the last 4. This is the oldest football rivalry in the entire sport. Older than the World Cup itself. Older than FIFA. Older than every other fixture on this list combined. The first international football match ever played, anywhere on the planet, between any two sides at any level of the game, was Scotland versus England. 30th of November, 1872, at a cricket ground called Hamilton Crescent in the Partick district of Glasgow. 4,000 spectators paid $1 each to watch. The final score was 0-0. And that scoreline is the beginning of every international football statistic that has been kept ever since. These two have been trying to beat each other without a break for over 150 years, which is a longer active rivalry than the sport itself has recognized rules. There was no penalty kick when the first Scotland-England match was played. There was no crossbar, just tape strung between two posts. There was no professional football, no goal net, no substitutes, no yellow card, no red card, and no radio broadcast. There was just a Scottish side, an English side, for 1,000 cold Glaswegians, and a 90-minute international friendly. And here we are, 152 years later, still counting. The Scots call England the old enemy. Not a nickname the English gave themselves. A nickname the Scots gave England. And they mean it. The two countries share an island, a language, and a genuinely long, genuinely complicated history that predates football by half a millennium. Centuries of English attempts to control Scottish territory. Bannockburn, Culloden, the Act of Union in 1707, which formally merged the two parliaments and which is still, today, a live political question in Scotland. Multiple modern independence referendums. A Scottish national identity that defines itself, in part by not being English, the way Ireland defines itself, the way Wales defines itself, the way Catalonia defines itself against Madrid. Football, in that context, becomes the cleanest possible way to settle the argument. Once every couple of years, you can look at a scoreboard and it will tell you, without ambiguity, who won. Which brings us to the 4th of June, 1977, at Wembley Stadium in London. Scotland beat England 2-1 that afternoon. Kenny Dalglish scored. Gordon McQueen scored. And on the final whistle, tens of thousands of Scottish supporters, who had traveled south by train and bus specifically for this fixture, poured onto the Wembley pitch and physically dismantled the ground. They tore down the crossbars. Both of them. They ripped the goal nets loose. They dug up chunks of the Wembley turf and carried it home in their pockets, wrapped in plastic, on the trains back to Edinburgh and Glasgow to plant in their own gardens. That invasion was not just chaos. That invasion was a statement. Because context matters. In 1977, Scotland had just qualified for the following year's World Cup in Argentina. England had failed to qualify. For the first time in a very long time, the Scots genuinely believed they had overtaken the English on the pitch, and standing on the Wembley grass, ripping down the posts and pulling up the turf, was them planting a flag on enemy soil in the middle of London, in front of the English national television audience, on the biggest stage the fixture could ever have. There is a cruel irony to that moment, because it was almost the last time Scottish football could actually claim to be better than English football. Scotland went to the 1978 World Cup in Argentina under a coach named Ally MacLeod, who had spent the previous 12 months telling any journalist within earshot that Scotland were going to win the tournament outright. They lost their opening match to Peru. They drew with Iran. They beat the Netherlands, reigning finalists at the time, with a stunning goal from Archie Gemmell that has its own Wikipedia entry. And they went home in the group stage. England pulled away over the next 2 decades. English clubs came to dominate European football. English football money, English television deals, English top-flight infrastructure, everything at senior level tilted south of the border. The Scotland-England fixture, which used to be the biggest annual match in the British calendar, grew so lopsided that the home international championship, the tournament that had housed it since 1884, was shut down entirely in 1984. The two now play each other only occasionally. And here is the fact that quietly kills every Scotland supporter reading this. Scotland and England have never met each other at a World Cup. Not once. Not in the group stage, not in the round of 16, not in a quarterfinal, not in a final. The oldest rivalry in football, the two countries who invented international football together, have never crossed paths at football's biggest tournament in 94 years of the competition, which makes 2026 a fascinating window. Scotland are in the middle of a genuine qualifying run under Steve Clarke. If both of them make it, and if the draw is kind or cruel enough, the fixture that has been waiting 152 years to happen might finally happen. And ripping up the turf might be back on the table. Not every rivalry on this list was born from a war. Some rivalries are quieter. Some rivalries are between two countries that actually get along, share a currency or a peninsula or a shopping mall, and simply refuse to lose to each other on a football pitch. And the last 2 entries on this list are exactly that. Spain versus Portugal. 2 countries that share a border, share the entire Iberian Peninsula between them, and share absolutely no desire to lose the neighbor's derby. There has been no war between them in modern memory. Both are members of the European Union. Both are on paper allies. And yet the fixture between them has produced one of the greatest single football matches of the 21st century. 15th of June, 2018. Group stage of the World Cup in Russia. Sochi on the Black Sea coast. Group B opening match. Spain arrived at that tournament in complete internal chaos. Their coach, Julen Lopetegui, had been fired 2 days earlier, 2 days after Real Madrid announced they were hiring him for after the World Cup. 2 days before their opening match, in the middle of the summer tournament, and they still walked out to face Portugal. Portugal arrived with Cristiano Ronaldo, reigning European champions. Ronaldo, at 33 years old, still the tournament's most dangerous single player. 4th minute. Ronaldo wins a penalty. Ronaldo scores it. 1-0 Portugal. 24th minute. Diego Costa equalizes for Spain. 1-1. 44th minute. Ronaldo scores again, a scrappy rebound off the goalkeeper. 2-1 Portugal. Second half. Spain absolutely reassemble themselves. Diego Costa scores second. Nacho scores an outrageous long-range strike. 3-2 Spain, and it looks like the match is over. And then, in the 88th minute, with the game slipping away, Portugal win a free kick roughly 25 yards out. Ronaldo stands over it. He curls it over the wall, into the top corner. 3-3. His hat-trick, at 33 years old, against Spain, on the opening night of a World Cup, from a free kick, in the 88th minute. That is the rivalry in a single game. Spain built as a collective. Portugal built for 2 decades around the best individual goal scorer the sport has ever produced. 2 philosophies about what a football team even is, put on the same pitch, and settled by 1 free kick from 25 yards. Is less venomous than the others on this list. Neighbors who needle rather than hate. But make no mistake, neither side can stand the idea of losing to the other. And then, the lightest one on the entire list. But also, quietly, the one whose vibes are about to change. Norway versus Sweden. 2 Scandinavian siblings who have spent decades winding each other up about absolutely everything. Language, music, skiing, salmon exports. Between 1814 and 1905, the two were actually joined in a formal political union under the Swedish crown until Norway peacefully declared independence in a referendum. That is roughly the historical baseline of this rivalry. A little brother who left home, and a big brother who never fully accepted the divorce. For 30 years, Sweden was the senior sibling on the football pitch too. Sweden finished 3rd at a World Cup in the United States in 1994. Sweden produced Zlatan Ibrahimovic, one of the most gifted forwards of his entire generation. Norway, in the same window, produced almost nothing at senior international level and did not qualify for a World Cup for nearly 3 decades. Sweden had the trophies. Sweden had the icon. Sweden had the pecking order. Now the pecking order is flipping. Norway have Erling Haaland, one of the most terrifying goal scorers alive right now. A player who has broken scoring records in the Bundesliga, in the Premier League, in the Champions League, at an age where most strikers are still finding their first regular starting spot. Sweden have an aging Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who technically retired from a national team, then unretired, then retired again, and who refuses to crown Haaland even now. Zlatan has said in interviews on the record that Haaland has not yet reached what he calls the freak of nature, meaning himself. That is not just trash talk. That is a big brother watching the throne tip toward the little brother and choosing not to speak the words out loud. And here is the very Norwegian catch. Norway finally get to feel superior. They have the best player on the peninsula. They have the bragging rights on paper. But underneath it, in every Norwegian football forum, in every Oslo bar, there is a very quiet fear. Sweden might still, somehow, go further in the tournament than Norway does. And being better than Sweden means absolutely nothing if Sweden lasts one round longer. For once, both siblings could be at the same World Cup to actually settle it. And that is exactly what terrifies them. 10 rivalries. 10 completely different reasons to hate. If there's one thing you take away from this video, take away this. Every single grudge on this list is older than the players. Older than the coaches. Older than most of the stadiums those matches will be played in this coming summer. Football did not invent any of these feuds. Football just gave two countries a place to put them for 90 minutes, on grass, in front of the world, with a scoreboard to settle the day. That is why they never die. That is why every rivalry on this list, no matter how many times someone reconciles in a post-match interview or shakes hands on the pitch afterwards, resets to zero the next time the two national anthems play back to back. Because rivalries do not belong to the players. Rivalries belong to the countries. And countries have longer memories than any footballer could ever carry on his own back. Zoom out on the 10 and you see the pattern. Every single one of them is between neighbors. Every single one of them. England and Scotland share an island. USA and Mexico share the longest land border in the Western Hemisphere. Germany and the Netherlands share the Rhine. Japan and South Korea share the Sea of Japan. Spain and Portugal share the Iberian Peninsula. Norway and Sweden share Scandinavia. Brazil and Argentina share the Rio de la Plata, and France and Italy share the Alps. Nobody hates you like the person next door. Not in politics, not in family, and not in football. Now here is what makes 2026 different from every other World Cup that came before it. There are 48 teams in it. There are 104 matches. There are 16 host cities. And the draw is going to produce group stage and knockout combinations that we have literally never seen before because the tournament has never had this many teams to combine in the first place. That means the odds that at least 4 or 5 of the rivalries on this list actually meet on the pitch this coming summer are, mathematically, higher than they have ever been at any World Cup in history. England could draw Argentina again. Argentina could draw Brazil again. USA could draw Mexico again. Germany could draw the Netherlands. France could draw Italy. Some of these will happen. Statistically, some of these will happen. And then there is the one that has been waiting 152 years. Remember the loop we opened at the very start of this video? The one about the number 1 entry being older, colder, and involving a border that most of the football-watching world could not draw on a map. That is Scotland and England. The oldest fixture in the entire sport. Two countries who invented international football together in 1872 and who have never once, in 94 years of the tournament, met each other at a World Cup finals. If both of them qualify, and if the draw pulls the right lever, 2026 could be the year the oldest rivalry in football finally becomes the newest match at a World Cup. And the Wembley crossbar might not be safe. So here is what we want from you. 3 questions. Answer them in the comments below. Number 1. Of every rivalry we just walked through, pick the one you personally most want to see happen at the 2026 World Cup. Not the one you think is most likely. The one that would make you clear your calendar. Say it out loud in the comments and tell us why. Number 2. Which fixture do you think we rank too low? And which one on this list would you drop to make room? Every football fan has a rivalry they think the rest of the world underrates, so drop yours below and defend it. Bonus points if you name a rivalry from your own domestic league that carries this much weight and never gets the international coverage. Number 3. England versus Argentina. Brazil versus Argentina. USA versus Mexico. Germany versus Netherlands. Pick one. That is the single most hated fixture in world football. Not the biggest. not the most historic, the most hated. Defend the pick in one sentence. The comments section on this video is going to be a live poll on which of these actually gets settled next summer, and this channel is going to be reading every single answer. If this video did its job, hit the like button. If you want the follow-up video where we break down what happens the second the 2026 draw drops and each of these rivalries finds out who they are actually playing this summer, hit subscribe. And if you want that draw analysis in your notifications the second it goes live, ring the bell, because it is coming faster than you think. 10 rivalries, 10 grudges, 1 World Cup. Whichever of these meets this summer, the football world is going to stop everything else and watch it happen. And whichever of them meets in a knockout round, somebody's grandfather is going to feel avenged. See you at the draw.